and I think one of the cool things about corn in that sense is you're still providing food.
It's corn.
It's corn.
I can't imagine a more beautiful thing.
Yeah. It has the juice.
When I tried it with butter, everything changed.
Yeah.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, it's almost food plot season, Jared, and Deer Grow is one of those products that has really changed the way that we plant food plots and the success we've seen from them.
No doubt. I've been, trying to plant food plots my entire whitetail hunting career, which is a little shorter than yours. But the minute that I started, or that I realized that I could get Deer Grow back into some of these remote plots where I couldn't get lime or fertilizer, especially in the 50-pound bag, format. Mm-hmm. So everything was changed. I could get into these spots moving forward with a backpack sprayer, and that's since escalated to these 40 or 60 gallon sprayers, and we're doing upwards of 5 to 10 acre food plots just with Deer Grow and having phenomenal success.
Yeah, and I mean with the price of fertilizer, lime, diesel, everything this year, I mean what better way to get in there and grow a successful food plot at about a third of the cost? Check out Deer Grow at deergrow.com. And we're back.
Are you ready is the question.
Oh, always.
Is that your first coffee of the day?
No. No. Like Nick, I must have coffee for my bowels to move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have they?
Yes.
Me too.
They have.
Were you saying that you said you hit the vape first thing in the morning and then to the bathroom?
Yeah, it's like
vape, coffee,
bathroom. Yeah.
It's a nice routine.
I think the older I get, the bathroom, it moves later in the morning.
Okay.
It's like, what time is it now? Yeah, it's usually around like 9:30, 10.
Really?
When nature starts calling.
Wow.
I like to build up like a bear and hibernate. I like to get some coffee in me first.
Okay.
Get my breakfast moving in the morning.
Yeah.
See, I'm off base because I was on Pacific time in Vegas last week, which I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm like, do I have to poop? Time change, 6 a.m. Yes, I do.
Yep.
Anyways,
That's good.
episode 113, right, Nick?
113.
There we go. 113. It is still January. Soon to be. Is this coming out in February?
February 7th.
Wow, it's February.
Yeah, man.
Groundhog's Day is in the past.
Cranking through them. Are we up to 2 years yet? We do 2 years?
Yes.
Hey.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, it was sometime in like January of 2021. Yeah, that we started this.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're
2 years
over the 2 years. Yep, over the 2 year mark.
Awesome. We haven't missed an episode of a
that was
week.
the whole goal.
There's been some like weeks that we missed, so we double up and stuff. But
yep, that was the whole goal. Was to listen. If we could just stay consistent and we don't miss a week, people will listen.
we're rocking.
Still growing.
So great. I did see somebody made a comment on like episode 3, which was when we flipped the Ranger in Kentucky and the tractors with the Confederate flags drove through our lease.
Mm-hmm.
That brought back good memories. I was like, dude, that seems like so long ago.
Yeah.
Jared had to mommy lift the Ranger off of my foot.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Don't worry, I got you.
Dude, I'm prepared for
Yeah.
situations. Yeah, if you flip the Ranger in the woods, I'm the guy you want to be with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll lift that Ranger off you. We figured out how to. It was a pretty new machine.
It was brand new.
Brand new.
It's like a maiden voyage.
Brand new, and we
Took it in the worst places.
We were able to. We flipped it over like just with a winch. It was totally on its side. We threw up over the frame and backing around.
On around a tree.
I get to college for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, and then somehow
no broken bones.
Somehow those tractors drove through the same area. I don't understand how that was possible. Lawn tractors, like lawn mowers.
Some kind of mountain portal they know about that we don't. The mountain just swallows them up.
Yep, spits them out on the other side.
Yeah.
Confederate flags and all.
Have you ever hunted that property?
A couple times.
On the blind in the bottom?
Yep. I've turkey hunted it more than I've deer hunted it. I mean, I had that one giant 11 this year, which if he made it through, I mean, he'll be straight boon next year. But dude, that property is so hard to hunt.
I know.
Like nearly impossible.
Yeah.
It's just a giant valley. You're going to hike way back in there and there's just so much room for them to go. There's no real definitive bedding.
I think that's why I prefer like farmland. You know what I mean? Typically, like the flatter, brushier it is, like the more huntable it is.
Yeah.
You know, like them big like West Virginia, even up north in PA, like
It's just giant
You
territory.
just have to cover more ground, and there's less huntable, less setups.
Well,
and
from a
stuff.
bow standpoint, like if you're still hunting with a gun, I get it, and just or you're turkey hunting, right? You just keep moving, calling. But like if you're bow hunting, like you have to know definitively where these deer are coming from and where they're going, and you have to get in between them. And if you don't, you're not gonna see shit. And so when you get into those big mountain areas like that, where there's not, unless there's like recent cuts and things like that, I mean, these deer they're just wandering. Like there's no definitive path. Like even when we were up with Shirk, like it's like, oh, here's a scrape. But like it's because just so happens that deer came through there and hit that scrape, and like he may never visit it again the entire season because he's just going a different direction every time.
Yeah.
Or he's bedding in a 45-acre clear cut, which he's got 7 different exit routes out of.
Yeah. I don't have nearly as much experience with it. I mean, I've kind of actively avoided it other than we went and hunted up with Steve. I just, I prefer.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, I prefer habitat that I think deer prefer, like,
Sure.
edge, food.
Yeah.
Those
big woods are tough, man.
They are.
And most of my properties are that type or similar.
I know. Well, that's why I brought it up. Is you lean towards even some of those West Virginia properties we're looking at.
Just big timber.
Yeah,
type.
you look at it and you're like, opportunity, giants, and probably there's some of that. And I look at it and see hills and one deer coming through there a couple of times a season, maybe.
I mean, that's it. Like it's not. It's not consistent. And I think that's where a lot of people, when we talk about Iowa and Kansas and stuff, or you see this on social, people instantly go to, man, like these guys just see this deer so often. No wonder. And it's just because it's completely different habitat types.
Mm-hmm.
In some of those areas, like even that.
And the deer are not traveling as far.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
In most cases.
Even that 8 point that you were hunting this year, I mean, that deer was living in maybe it was 500 or 600 acres, but it was, of that 500 or 600 acres, besides the food, there were 100 acres of deer habitat. Like the rest was just open field that he was kind of crossing at points.
Well, and I'm pretty confident the reason we weren't seeing him is not because of how much, diverse habitat there was, as much as that he was just moving at night.
Yeah.
Eventually we honed in on him. I had some cameras kind of in his core area, and even then,
you still weren't.
We were lucky to get him at last light.
Yeah. Whereas I think like some of these other deer that like I'm hunting are moving thousands of acres at times.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, plenty of these deer, I see consistently, but it may be, my consistent might be every 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And that's just because the other 2 days they're off of 100 acres, or off of 200 acres or whatever the heck I'm hunting. Which makes them vulnerable to neighbors, but those neighbors have just as good of a chance to harvest it as I do because it's just tough hunting. And again, I think that's where it comes back, as we get into this time frame of February and stuff, really trying to find definitive bedding areas, which I think in those big woods, I am one who believes that there are some certain areas that deer will bed consistently, but I also think it's very infrequent compared to an area like where you're hunting. That those deer just have multiple beds throughout an entire ridge or 1,000 acres that they can just pop into versus I got to go back to this 10-acre thicket because that's the only thicket that exists within, a square mile.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Like how, because it's not, it's not hard to go out and find beds. Like if you just go and walk and, especially in the snow or, you can find them typically in farm country where I'm at, and I think in hill country too, typically like on your leeward side. So, primarily the wind is coming from the west, north or south.
Yep.
And so most of your beds are going to be like on that military crest on the eastern side, or in the late season sometimes it's on a southern side because the sun is. That's why guys say you'll find sheds there and stuff. I have found that to be true. A lot of times they're on knobs, like so in hill country, and this is what makes my property so challenging to hunt is a lot of the bedding happens on leeward facing knobs that overlook ravines, and then food sources are on the opposing side. And so a lot of times what will happen is they'll get up close to last light, on a bed food pattern. they'll work down these drainages into the bottom where the wind swirls like crazy, and they'll just stage there for a while. That's where you find a sign. And then eventually
work their way up.
You know, they'll either come up or they'll circle it some way. And so to hunt a situation like that, you know, we've kind of had a progression of how we've tried to do it. In a combination of maybe all of those things we learned along the way do work or have worked out for us. You know, one is you get in a box blind on the food source and find a way to approach it that they can't see. It's like it's a corner of a field or it's
screened, whatever.
Screened, yeah, something like that can work. It's how I killed that fuzzy what exactly. You know, he I'm pretty sure he came off this bedded ridge, you know, circled around us. He got lucky with the wind.
Sure.
The other one that I prefer is, and we've talked about this before, that parallel trail. You know, so they don't always get up and go straight down.
Yep.
A lot of times they'll get up out of their bed and they'll parallel the food source.
Yep.
You know, until they feel like they've smelled the whole thing. So
typically with that wind coming across the front of their face.
And so when they do that, typically it seems like they're bedding more in the bottoms. So like those would be the two locations. They'll either bed on those leeward facing knobs or they'll bed in the bottoms where the winds are swirling. Like somewhere you'd look at and say, it's a good rut spot. You know, sometimes you'll find a mature buck bed there because the wind just swirls up and through those valleys.
Yeah, and I think that's something we saw in kind of some of these big woods. I mean, I tend to, and I guess it was kind of, you know, learn by where you bump them. It seems like I bump more deer in the big woods higher up. You know, more, especially more mature bucks. I do find a lot of that, you know, sign dripping down through the bottom or heading to wherever they're feeding. But from like a buck bed sign, it's like, okay, this deer, like I know where he's bedding. He's bedding here. It's on a knob or it's on a hill or it's on a ridge. And then he's working his way down through there. And it's because it's so difficult to approach that deer. Like to try to get up there and hunt that deer, you're either he sees you and he runs off the backside over the other side of the hill, or he smells you and he's gone before you get there.
That's literally the point. And when you find those beds, it makes perfect sense because you're like, how would you ever access this? Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
I think that's where, like, if we talk, when we're talking to Rendell Eric, you know, he's talking about, you know, you can almost imagine in your head when you're in Iowa, there's these just like blocks of timber and brush, and it's staged like, okay, here's where all your does and fawns are. Here's where your young bucks are. Your big buck bed's back here. And it just, and again, deer just do what they're supposed to do out there. Whereas like if I'm looking at a block of 1,000 acres of timber with some intermittent openings, it's a needle in the haystack.
It's hard to make heads or tails of. They're you know, it's difficult to relate to some of that like advice that you get from Midwestern guys, or some guys might say the same about, you know, some properties that we've hunted. I've come across, whether we had the opportunity to hunt them or you just see them on the map, like there are properties where you're like A to B, you know, how could you not kill these deer?
Yeah,
you know, there's a very clear pattern. There's very clear terrain
features
on how you do that.
We see that in Kansas often. It's like here's where they're at, here's where they're going, and they'll cover ground, but it's like A to B.
Yeah, and it's not fair because like that's not most properties aren't that way. And when you see that, you're like, how is this possible? They just come right across here, like right past the stand thing, and
that's what they do.
That's what they do. But a majority, you know, probably 95% of stand locations across, you know, the U.S. I would say a lot of northeastern stuff, and certainly the big wood stuff. It's way less straightforward. You know, there's a lot of guesswork that goes into it. There's a lot less consistent patterns that are happening, and so success is less frequent.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where
that's where we say deer do what deer are supposed to do, like in the Midwest,
and they just don't typically out here. I mean, it's one thing.
It's just harder to pinpoint.
You know, I think I was reading something this morning that was basically saying, I think it was from NDA or whatever. It's like 88 or something. Yeah, 88% of deer harvested last year were shot on private land, meaning 12% of deer were killed on public land. That's at least what it said, right? Take it for what it's worth.
Across the country?
Yep. Which kind of makes sense, you know, in terms of the amount of private land versus public land, except when you get out west. And I think when you start to look at that, you know, and this is where I think the public and the private land guys kind of look different is, you know, I love Rendell's style where he's like, listen, if I go in and screw up in a public area, I just move to the next public area, right? Where most of us private guys are like, I can't do that. I got 100 acres. And if I screw up this 100 acres, like, my private property is effectively worthless at that point. Like I can't bounce to another one, or I can't bounce to another alternative, because most people don't have multiple private acreages to hunt.
You're right, but I don't think most people think about it that way. I think most people just continue to hunt, and
which is and I think they screwed up.
And they absolutely do.
Yeah. And so when I look at that,
that's why their neighbors who don't hunt nearly as frequently,
kill big deer.
That's where that phenomenon comes from. Not 100% of the time, but you've got guys that are like,
dedicated.
Whatever. Even if they know what they're doing, you bump deer. It's hunting, not killing. And you're putting pressure on a property, putting pressure on a deer, and the neighbor that, not because he's like, I'm going to stay out until it's exactly right.
No, he just doesn't hunt that.
He just doesn't hunt, and then when he goes out the one day, he's like, oh, there he is.
Wow.
Whacked him.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's
we
where
see it happen all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, it comes back to, like, if you look at these factors on a piece of property, right? I think that even with pressure and bedding and everything else, number one is food, right? If you don't have food on your property, you may get some deer moving through it, but you aren't going to have consistent deer on your property. It's just a fact. Like, even this new property I bought in Kentucky.
Well, yeah, but you can't just have food.
Sure, exactly. I know, but I'm just saying, like, if you're looking at it from a standpoint of big timber, right? If you only have acorns, but there's also 1,000 acres of acorns around you, like, it's going to be really infrequent that you have deer, unless you have a really defined bedding area, or you put less pressure on your property, or these other factors. And so I think what's so hard for people to understand, and again, from a public land mindset, like, you don't have a choice. Like, it is what it is. You can't go and make food. You can't go in there and create better bedding. You don't control the pressure on it, right? There's literally nothing you control on public land.
Yeah, you're right, too, though. I do think that food is... It's almost weird to think about it this way. Food, I think, would supersede cover.
Absolutely.
Or habitat in general.
Absolutely.
And I actually think that pressure would supersede quality of habitat in general.
Yes.
In terms of a factor as well. Like, case in point, you'll see deer bed in backyards to eat apple trees, like, during the time that they're dropping, or whatever the food source is. They will... we see that all the time, dude. They will choose lack of pressure over quality bedding.
Well, we've all hunted properties probably where, Kansas is a great example, literally we have a tree line and then 80 acres of food.
Mm-hmm.
And given, like, it's a little bit of a chess game of where they're going to come across that line to get a shot, 9 times out of 10, you've got deer within bow range, and you're basically only have a big open field of food and one tree line to sit on. Yeah, they've got it. And so, when you look at that, I think that people, when they start to look at their property from a, what should I do? Because that's what we're talking about now, right? It's February. What can I do to this property in the next several months that is going to make a difference next season, right? And as reflective on last season, number one is food. And for most people, that's limited, right? Because of equipment, because of terrain. If you've got 100 acres and 80 of it is open, then food, besides like cost of seed and equipment, is not really limited, right? You've got plenty of places. But if you've got a 100-acre block of timber, you're limited in what you can put in there. Which is why, I bit the bullet and paid to clear out an acre of food behind my house, and it changed the entire property. Like 1 acre of food, we didn't see less than 6-7 deer per sit last year, whereas we may see 6 or 7 deer in a month before that.
Yeah.
Just makes that big of an impact on a property.
Reason to be there.
So I think, like, as people are starting to think, like, what can I do to make, a lot of people are going to go to, well, I'm going to do cuts. I'm going to create more browse. I'm going to cut, hinge cuts for bedding. Yeah. But if you don't have food, those deer aren't necessarily going to utilize that stuff.
Well, I think for a timber track, I think a chainsaw is your best friend. You know what I mean? That's the quickest work you can do is, it's creating cover, but it's also creating
browse.
But not to the level of like a food plot, a planted source.
And so I think
which also gives them a destination, to our point of.
There it is.
Right.
I think that's where the big piece is that browse from a standpoint of a deer's diet is the most critical. Browse from the standpoint of harvestable deer,
Tough.
very low on the totem pole.
Yeah, challenging.
Not a destination. They're browsing. They're moving around. There's no pinpoint of where that deer is coming and going type of thing.
Also, from a social standpoint, I don't think that the browse or just a managed piece of timber gives them that.
No.
And maybe this is where, we've admitted we don't fully understand the social dynamics of deer, and it probably is different from a Midwestern deer to a exclusively big timber deer that literally has no destination food source available to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they want something. I think they want they want an area that they can go to and leave sign, interact with other deer, at least to some level,
Well, where do you see most of your scrapes and stuff? On field edges.
Right, it's all on field edges. Inevitably, they end up out there at night.
Mm-hmm.
It's challenging to know, like, what is a destination food source versus, it really does seem to have to do something with size. I mean, I don't see a lot of deer staying in our acre food plots for very long.
No.
They'll come in the evenings, and doe groups will stay there, all throughout the day and stuff. But ultimately, all these deer, seem to make it out to a big clearing at some point, at least where I'm at.
Sure. I think that's if it exists, right?
If it exists.
Where this new farm is that I have, I'm in pasture country, right? So there is no ag. There's pasture. There's a lot of pasture grasses. There's a lot of big timber. So frankly, I don't know where those deer are going. I don't know where they're trying to go. I don't, I'm going to create that big destination food source. That's one of the first things I'm going to put into play because I think it's the most impactful on a property that you have a lot of timber and cover already.
That is the question for a guy like me that hunts farm country primarily. And also what's intimidating about it is you look at it on a map and you're like, where are they going? Where are they
There's
coming?
Food everywhere.
Yeah. There's no, is diversity the word? In terms of
it's a monoculture from the overhead.
Right. To be able to look at it and say, here's things that will dictate movement. You said they're coming from here, going to here. Here's the terrain features they'll use to get there.
Yeah.
There's way less of that in a big woods environment than there is, let's say in farm country or a Midwestern environment.
And I think that's where they're all different challenges, right? Like you literally consistently could say, just like that big 8, hey, I think he's bedding here. And it's because there is no other cover that makes sense for him to be at based on where you're seeing him.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I look at that, if I place that same deer in my property, it's like he could be anywhere.
Yeah.
But at the same point, if I put a piece of food out, right, like a 5-acre brassica field, that deer is coming to that field because there are no other fields. There is no other food around. Mm-hmm. But in your case, there's food everywhere. So he could go to, as the season progresses and as that food gets harvested, it starts to diminish. But in the early part of the season, there's a standing cornfield here. There's green beans here. Like, you can't pinpoint or say he's definitively, where he's bedded, but you don't know where he's going. I probably know where he's going, but I don't know where he's bedded.
Right. Ultimately, I don't think anything can beat boots on the ground. I did make it out the other day.
Did you?
Yeah, we walked for, I don't know what we covered.
Where'd you go?
5 miles maybe, the Hinton.
Yeah.
So that's that property that recently got timbered, and it's thick,
Yeah.
And we didn't find any
sheds. A lot of
sheds.
tops laying.
I lost my sunglasses. Found them. Went back and found them. So I knew my eyes were keyed up. I was on them. But I've walked that property many times before.
Yeah.
I know where to kind of look for sheds and stuff. I know where most of the beds happen, but I found some new ones. Found every year what kind of as we're you gain perspective on a piece of property, or you understand maybe like what a buck might be looking for. I found some new areas, not that I've never seen before. I can obviously, you can look out and see a lot of the property, but there's a drainage that runs down through the middle of this property. Mm-hmm. And like the grass that's on your Kentucky property, it's a lot like that, but it's maybe a little taller, like maybe 4 foot. And, it's just one of them areas where you're like, I can't really walk through it. It's too wet. It's like, it's just kind of, it's there. It's near the entrance of the property. And we walked right through the middle of it, and it's like, dude, there's
beds.
I mean, multiple buck beds in there, and some big rubs. And we kind of stayed out of there because they were timbering it this year. But I mean, that gives me a place to start.
Yeah.
So it's whether we survey that or I find some way to run cameras on it. It's like, dude, just when you go out and walk it, you can see it's not, like I said, it's not rocket science. You can see where the beds are. You can see where the trails are this time of year. Dad likes to say look at this cattle trail.
Love that.
but yeah, I mean,
Well, it's because you're jamming so many deer into that small. And I think that's where, people who hunt big woods, like I'll be the first to say, like, man, I'm just jealous of how much food you have around there and like how many deer you can support. At the same time, like the ability to pattern those deer in your area is like nearly impossible until you get towards the later season. There's only definitive spots that it makes sense. And I think that, everybody has a struggle. Like yours right now, per what we're going to do in February, is like we're going to do a burn because you're trying to create more cover. You've got plenty of food or plenty of places to make food, but you're limited on cover.
Places to make food, yeah. We run out of food too, just like anybody. I mean, dude, those crops come off.
Yep.
What happens at our place is, there's a lot of, hundreds of acres of corn and soybeans in the area, kind of all around the property and on the neighbors and stuff too. And, every year by, let's call it mid to end of November at the latest, all of it's gone, you know, and when they harvested it, it gives them a little bit of stuff there, but it, by December,
it's barren.
It's barren, and we've done a lot of, timber work, there's browse in the woods for them. And we, we do food plots, not a ton. We do, like whatever, 5 to 10 acres,
which is not a lot on 1,000 acres.
Right. Yeah. And they're all small. I think the biggest one we have is like, an acre and a half maybe. And dude, they just get pulverized. I think we have maybe a little too many deer. We probably have too many deer. A lot of does. And, so by mid-December, it's feeling pretty barren. It kind of starts to feel like, well, there's not really any bucks hanging around that I want to hunt. There's not really, some of the food sources, does are still kind of cleaning up and stuff. And so I just think, I don't know. I didn't have all the knowledge, 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago when we started implementing on this prop. We're just like, hey, food plots, hey, TSI, hey, and all these things are good. It's kind of led us to where we're at. But at this point, it seems more doable than ever before. Like I think I have it's not that hard. Like if they have cover and they have food, and you don't pressure them, that they'll be there.
Yeah.
But those things are challenging to create and keep pressure off of. Especially with we talk about our dynamic. We have several guys hunting and stuff. But I think what we're lacking at this point is certainly a large unpressured cover sanctuary or a few of them throughout the property. 10, 20 acres or more. And maybe even more than that, especially as we get into the season, a quality food source also that's unpressured. The pressure thing goes without saying. I mean, the less you can pressure it, the better, because all our food's gone, Dude, I don't know what to think about brassicas anymore. I'll be honest.
I was going to ask that because, the one thing that we, and again, every situation is different, but just like we talked about last time a little bit of like, who's the authority or who should you listen to? Think of the dynamics of even the 2 properties or 3 properties that we're talking about here that we all hunt. Like what you should plant is probably not what I should plant. And what you should do for cover is probably not what I should do for cover. And so when you start to think about like these broad stroke, let's use switchgrass for an example. Like I've got switchgrass sitting over here from Sturgis. It's, I'm going to plant some switchgrass, but people will argue, just like you're doing with your fallow field side, like a Craig Harper, and say, well, there's no browse. There's nothing food related in switchgrass. So like, why would deer want to stay in that? But if I have 200 acres of timber that I'm TSIing close by, do they really need browse also in the switchgrass? Because they have browse right there in the woods.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I don't know. I don't have any switchgrass. So you and I are kind of going in 2 different directions. So like last year, we talked a lot with Craig Harper and also with Jeff Sturgis, kind of opposing viewpoints on
fallow field or planted field, on
how to approach, the cover aspect. A Jeff Sturgis, generally speaking, maybe not every time, will say he prefers switchgrass. It's it's faster. It's more able to be controlled. There's an edge element to it. And I think Craig Harper's more old school, more old field management type of, hey, work with what you got, work with the seed bed, release what's there, kill the invasive stuff. So just because of, for me, I think it was that fear of not knowing how they would use switchgrass, like that doesn't have that food element to it. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to put the work into like an old field management project and I have a seed bed that exists, like I can eliminate that risk. You know, if I just do the work on this.
With a preface too that you're limited on woody cover and browse as it is. Like you have blocky timber like pieces around.
Well, I think we're limited on just dense cover.
Yep.
In general, you know, you call it rabbit cover, you know, that real thick stuff that's kind of impenetrable.
And it's very fragmented landscape.
It's very fragmented. Yeah. We have a lot of old pastures is what it is. You know, it's old fallow grasses that by November are laid down. I mean, it's no more than a foot tall.
Right.
It's useless. It's great fawn and cover in the fall and turkeys and stuff. But
then trash.
In terms of, you know, and so this is where we go back and forth between principles here. You know, Sturgis's ideas around the herd influencer. I do think there's something to that. You know, that's pertaining to holding deer on your property during those key elements or key times of the year. So basically, I elected to go with the old field management style. I'm not going to plant.
It's also cheaper.
It's also cheaper. Yeah, a big factor as well. I'm not going to pay for 20 acres of switchgrass seed.
Super expensive.
So at least for this part of the farm, it's not saying I won't do switchgrass in the future, but so for these, I think it's more than 20 acres. I think it's like 30
something,
35 acres maybe of just old pasture. Like I said, I got to give my dad huge props on this. He went out and did a ton of work, ton of tractor time on this. We actually bought a new sprayer for it, a PTO driven boom sprayer for the tractor. We went out and sprayed. Dad went out and sprayed
during the cool season, so that was like October, November.
Well, even earlier, I think. In fact, take it all the way back. I think he cut it in like August, September. He cut everything. The idea there was I wanted a manageable amount of fuel.
Sure.
Dad's afraid of fire as is, and rightfully so. We've had some close calls.
Fire bad.
Right, and so it really took some convincing to get him on board for this project. So we went out and cut the fields to, you know, the idea there is to control the fuel that's on it. So I have it was maybe this tall.
Sure.
And at maybe a couple weeks after that, we went out and sprayed fire breaks.
Yep.
So just glyphosate sprayed fire breaks around a bunch of different sections. I maybe have 10 of them we're going to end up burning. 2 to 3 weeks later, we're getting into October time frame. I had Dad go out with a disc and turned over all the fire breaks. So exposed just bare soil. So I have now 10, 15 different burnable areas.
Yeah, gridded areas.
With fire breaks put in. This is in October. Also, so this is, like I said, mid to end of October at this point, I had Dad go out and spray glyphosate on the remainder of the field.
Yep, okay, nuke it.
The idea there that I didn't fully understand until we were kind of getting into it was by that time, all of the broadleafs that we want still in that field have gone dormant. Almost, it's like, where did they go? Like, there was ragweed and stuff,
just
milkweed.
Seed in the bed, dormant annuals.
Yeah, so it was all there in the summer, and then it was gone by the time October rolled around. But that grass, grass was still alive and growing.
Yep.
You know, it was only 50s, 40s, 50s with some frost.
Full season fescue.
So we went out and sprayed to kill all the grass. So now we have fire breaks put in, grass killed, hopefully dormant broadleaves and seed bed existing beneath. Which brings us to now. So we haven't done any work since October. We're kind of looking for weather to go out and burn it. So we're going to go out and do ideally, we'll start with backing burns and we'll see how fast it's going. So, we'll have probably 10 guys. Dad's got a bunch of guys from church rounded up where he's going to come out and give us a hand. Some of them have come and shot does and stuff off the property and just friends.
Yep.
And so we're going to burn it all off. That probably will be sufficient. That will get rid of the thatch is the main idea. The thatch that's there, it'll release the existing seed bed.
With the hopes that the fescue's dead because you sprayed it when it was actively growing in October, November.
Yep. Yeah, and the last piece that I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out yet is I initially wanted to disc everything.
Yeah, disc the seed bed up.
Yeah, and I just don't know if it's going to be like it seems like that time of year it's either going to be frozen
or slop. And
so I don't know if maybe we have to have Craig back up before then. But I don't know if we just burn it and let it go or burn it and then plan to go back and disc it like in as soon as it's dry enough, like whenever you're
Yeah.
planting clovers in and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, maybe.
April, May.
I mean, most will tell you that if you just let it go, that seed bed is gonna, and you're gonna get a stage of maturity, right? You're gonna see all those ragweeds and annuals and stuff. Then, by year 2, 3, 4, you're gonna get those woody, blackberry, black raspberry-esque type plants and more woody browse type stuff. And that's what's gonna build your structure.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're gonna have 3-4 foot of structure, and then whatever it is, 5 to 7 years, you're going to burn it and set it back.
Right.
Of which you probably won't burn it and set it all back. You'll probably go back into those zones and burn.
Well, it's cool that we have those
pieces of them.
zones. The biggest one is probably
2 acres?
5.
5 acres?
Biggest one is probably 5 acres. So,
yeah.
Well, I don't know. Do the math.
But you
backwards.
do. But you burn a 5 acre, stage block out, and you set that back, and then this one you start rotating those, and now you've got variations of different successional habitat.
Right.
Which is that's the rabbit cover, right?
Yeah.
That's what deer want.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, or what will be interesting as that progresses over the next few years is, number one, how do deer use it? They're going to use it. They're going to be in there. More so, how do you hunt them?
Right.
Does it just become a bedding source where you're trying to pattern them to and from there? Or I think at some point you're going to have to stage either box blinds or food plots in that 35-acre block, because those deer, if having good cover and having good browse, are probably not going to want to move far. Like a rabbit, they want to stay close to cover, in and out, in and out.
Mm-hmm. I think that the terrain will probably dictate a lot still of how they bed within that cover.
Sure.
And so they're not using it now because
At
it's
all.
pretty open. And so once that cover's there, I think it'll be a learning experience just to see, cameras will tell us, and observation should tell us pretty quickly. Like, I'm sure there will be certain areas within those patches of cover that they use more frequently, especially the bucks that we're trying to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And that may eventually lead to, and some guys will tell me I'm doing this backwards, they might be right, kind of a destination food source somewhere within. I mean, I wouldn't put it past us to like eliminate one of those sections eventually. We're like, hey, they're bedding on either side of this, or hey, they're really coming from here.
Make this food.
We may eliminate one of those sections at some point. We say, hey, this sets up really well for access. The wind direction is such that they're coming up into it this way. Maybe we turn that old fallow field that we've that we've worked into a food source at some point.
Well, and I think that's where, and again, it's kind of an evolution of talk, but you and I probably started with 1/4 acre, 1/2 acre brassicas. You make an acre, and I mean, it goes back to like the deer just mow these things down.
They do. They crush them.
And so per like what we were talking about earlier with this new Kentucky piece, like I'm thinking about some substantially 3 to 5 acre type brassica fields.
Yeah.
Mainly from a tonnage standpoint to be able to handle the deer, maybe not so much in September, October, but absolutely as November, December, January roll around.
Yeah, dude, I don't know if you can have enough. I mean, to be honest, like the deer just, so few people are, I don't know where in the country, that they have everything that they need during those critical months.
Yeah.
It seems like almost anywhere you go, if you have the food, during that critical time of the year, like they will come. So that's what happens on our place is like by that December time frame, inevitably there's a standing cornfield. It may not be anywhere we can hunt. It could be, a couple miles this way or and they go, that's where they go.
Yeah.
All the deer move there. And I know for a fact, there may not even be guys hunting them. You know what I mean? It's like,
Sure.
And it's not the same every year either. It's like one cornfield didn't get gotten to, or, something happened that kept the farmer out of this piece, and they all go there.
Well, and I think the other attractive thing for like, let's say the non-farm guy, like even me, I want to try to put in some corn and beans in some of these open areas in Kentucky and Ohio that I have this year. That said, like those are not easy to establish. Like they're real finicky, especially like to grow like a good yield of corn that has productive ears.
I don't know. I've never done corn. I'll say beans. The first year I ever planted beans, I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
I just turned the dirt over, broadcast the seed out, packed it in. I put deer grow, no fertilizer that year, and I had like
the best beans.
4 foot tall bean. It was amazing.
Yeah. But I say that in retrospect to like a brassica, which is like that shit grows on my truck seat.
Yeah.
And so like if you go out and you want to establish like a 3 acre thing, like a lot of people say, well, maybe put corn. Like you establish a 3 acre brassica field, that is a lot of green food.
The tough part about non-GMO, non-Roundup ready,
Yeah.
is that what?
Roundup ready.
Non-Roundup ready plant species like brassicas certainly are one of them. You know,
Mhm.
clover's kind of on the edge. There are
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can use certain herbicides on them
That's the toughest thing. Like if you know,
to clear the slate. You mean in terms of time?
in terms of like competition, you know, like my
Yeah.
brassicas get competed with heavily. You know,
Even when you nuke that plot previously?
yeah.
Really?
Yeah, well, and so that's where I'm at kind of a crossroads of like typically what I do is I'll spray, and then 2 weeks later I'll go in and disc and put seed down, brassica seed.
Mhm.
It seems like with that method, which you know I'm pretty sure is the correct
Sure.
method. Those weeds catch up, like they just grow just as fast as the brassicas.
Interesting.
And so a few times we haven't had the opportunity to get in beforehand, so we just spray and put the brassica down right there and don't turn it over.
Mhm.
And those have done better.
Really?
Those have done really well.
Mm.
That seed's typically small enough to get.
That's
to
what I
the
had to do
thatch.
in Kentucky this year, or in Ohio, because it was too wet. I couldn't disc, so I literally went in. I had nuked it, and then I just seeded into it, and I mean it did marginally well.
So the next version of that, like the supreme weed preventative method, would be a no-till drill.
Yep.
Spray and drill whatever you're putting in at the time, because you can get, you know,
Yep.
even a soybean you can drill through
it.
and then whatever it is, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, you know, once those have germinated, go in and hit it again.
Nuke it again
and
because
get
of the
those
Roundup Ready.
4 weeks ahead of your weeds now.
Yeah.
You know, and that's your ultimate. I mean, that's what farmers do.
Well, and that's what my plan is on some of these summer ones is to. I've got a drill coming. It's a Tar River, which is that's that cheap drill that I sent you.
Yeah.
3-point. You can put weight on the front. I'm not trying to be a farmer. I just need to make good soil contact. And the fact that I could go in and drill it and then like glide it in the same day. Like I'll go in, I'll try to like, you know, probably glide beforehand if it's like super overgrown. But let's say I'm going into like an old, a field that doesn't have like super grasses and stuff. In April, I could go in and drill that with corn and then the same day spray it, nuke it, and like it'll be fine. You know, maybe a month later, come back and nuke it again.
100%. I mean, I say the later you can spray, the better.
Exactly. So, you know, when you're talking about those spring plots and stuff, you know, I think that drill aspect, and it's also a time saver, man. When you go in and you've got to spray it, let it die for 2 weeks, come back, disc the whole damn thing, then broadcast it, then call it a packet. Like, dude, there's so much time that's involved in that. Like, there's only so much time in the day. I mean, we don't do this full time, so it's not like we can just say, hey, we've got 5 days to plant 20 acres. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's like, I got 1 day to get as much shit done as possible.
And usually, yeah, dude, I've been planting like in monsoon rains.
Yeah, it's
like,
freaking dark out.
It's not ideal.
No, that's why I'm looking at this drill. Now, what I don't know, and I know people do it, is like the success of drilling things like brassicas, you know, because now you're in a 7.5 inch spacing, you know, you're in a row format, you know, versus like, you know, I kind of like the broadcast of brassicas and.
Well, dude, I'm questioning brassicas like just period. Like,
Do you not? For what reasons? Just
I
attractability or tall?
Yeah, attractability.
See, I mean, I think that they crush. Again,
Yeah.
here's the difference.
I've had mixed results. I certainly like they hit it.
You're in an area where even when some food comes off from the farmers, there's still, you know, cut cornfield, maybe some standing beans, maybe some standing corn. I'm in an area there isn't any other crops, right? Like there's browse and there's usually acorns. Unless the last 2 years. So, I mean, it's it. This is what they have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's a bit of a, if there's a natural selection of, do I have A, do I have B? No, I'll go to brassicas at C. Mine default right to C because there isn't anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, if I had to, I would say ours is like, I mean, do they love corn and beans? That 8-point was coming over in that valley because of those beans, like the last few remaining beans.
Greens. Yeah, green beans.
Yep. And I will say there was a stark difference on either side of this valley, there was this big, thick drainage that I was hunting. One side had the corn had all been cut.
Mm-hmm.
Beans was left on one side, and they were dried down.
Yep.
And everything was cut on this side.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see anything over here. I saw a lot of deer over here.
Heading to those dried out beans.
To the dried out beans. This was like October.
Mm-hmm.
This was like end of October.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's where...
And there was no acorns this past year, so I mean, that's maybe had a lot to do with that.
And again, that's where... And again, I think if you look at who you're talking to, right, and I know it's not in all cases, but Jeff Sturgis is usually against those summer type plots.
Yeah, I'm a big bean guy. I don't think you can go wrong with beans. I still can't fully grasp that. Maybe it's like from a tonnage standpoint, but like, dude, they love soybeans. They really do.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't think that they're as easy to establish as some of these other things, but I do think that, and if you're planting a half acre of beans, they're going to get mowed.
Can't do it.
Yeah. So you have to have the space.
But so are your brassicas.
But you can get them established to a point where then they're...
Maybe. Or
let me put it this way. Your brassicas are being mowed during a time you can hunt them. Most of the time, your beans are growing during a time that you can't hunt them. Right? They're getting mowed in July, August, and you can't hunt the deer at that point.
Yeah.
Here's
kind of where I'm at with it. I'm kind of feeling like the cereal grains have grown on me from an attractability and from a pressure tolerance standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've also kind of let Clover fall by the wayside, and that was a mistake.
I think we've neglected Clover because of brassicas.
Yeah. So I think, at least for my farm, a strategy that I may cut out brassicas this year. I may not do any brassicas. In lieu of that, I'm going to consider planting all of my smaller plots, anything an acre to acre and a half and less in either or both a cereal grain like winter wheat or oats or clover.
And I think the point of both of those would just be purely attractability,
staging area type plots.
Yeah, because they're not necessarily going to be able to support a ton of deer.
And the only way that works is if I put like a 10-acre bean field in the middle
to take the pressure off,
to have a destination food source.
Yeah, agree. I think that's the big part is when people start to look at, everybody's thinking about now, like, oh, what am I going to plant next year? Some people are confident in what they have. I had guys send me pictures, and it's weird, but they had brassica plots like still loaded right now, and it's like something's missing on your property. You're not holding enough deer. If your brassicas still look like that in February almost, you're not holding enough deer. And I would assume it's because maybe they don't have
stuff or something.
Yeah, I think it's more of like they don't have good cover, or there's like a giant standing bean field that's just pulling all those deer in off of that. But I mean, there's something to be said about good digestible green food, whether it's clover, brassicas, cereal grains, whatever. I mean, deer are going to go towards that because it's easy to digest. It's more easy to digest than corn for sure. And so I think having that mix in there is important. That said, standing grain has a huge value that I think is often overlooked, mainly because you're like, oh, Farmer Joe down the road is planting it. I don't need to plant it. If you don't have the room to plant it, meaning the acreage, you can't. But if you do, I think you're overlooking something that could be a huge value, especially as you get towards that November, December, January timeframe.
For sure.
Going back to herd influencer, I want to be a herd influencer in November, January through January.
Yeah.
And greens will help, but a lot of times they're mowed by then. So the only thing that's going to really help me get through besides browse is standing grain on my property.
Yeah, they just seem to prefer it too. Like in my experience, they seem to prefer grains to brassicas.
Yeah. And I think why we have this discussion now is, over the next 6-8 months, you and I are going to talk about progressions that we're doing on the property and what we're seeing, like old field, cereal grains, a big destination bean field, standing corn. I'm definitely one of the plots on this new Kentucky farm is going to be 3 to 5 acres of brassicas. I'm just going to drop a big ass brassica plot on there.
Well, dude, what better way to see? I mean, if you have a field full of corn, beans, and brassicas,
yeah,
where are they at?
Well, and so that's where I think a lot of people who are trying to really dive in and say, well, I want this doe group and this doe group to stay separate and them to go to these plots. Like, deer are just going to be deer. Like, you can't control that shit. I know in theory it makes sense that you're separating them out and you're keeping doe groups separately. But if you're talking about 100 or 200 acre property, those deer are intermixing all the time. Like, these deer are in this plot and then they're back over to this plot, and these does are bedded here and they're bedded here, and they'll switch. Like, it's just, that is deer behavior, right? Deer like to be social. Besides those mature bucks who really just hate everybody, most of these deer want to be social. There's always a social aspect to it. So I think that when you start to look at the two things that, if you can plant food, the next two things that come into mind that are extremely important are, do you have definitively identified bedding cover? So if we go back to those big wood scenarios, is it just a bunch of big mature timber, or do you have a couple acre pockets of like thick, like gnarly deer bedding here? Super critical. I think that you probably could get away with more than I could just because of the limited cover that you have. Like, even if it was a little bit open, deer still has a bed there because there's no other woods. That said, I think most of your stuff is pretty thick. Those thick draws and stuff like that provide good cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. We see most of the bucks, the ones that most of the mature bucks, when we figure out where they're bedding, it's weird. Like, they're in like little pockets, just like little stuff that people don't go into. Like, I think the pressure supersedes the quality of habitat.
Yep. And again, like what we're looking at, it's like, I might go on 50 acres of my property and it's all open. And it's like, okay, deer are passing through here. There's rubs, there's scrapes. None of those deer are really bedding in there because, I mean, one, possible pressure. Two, there's just like, it's cover, but it's not quality cover. And they have other options that are quality, right? So they're deferring. I'm not going to lay here because it's thicker and more secure over here. And so because of those options, I think that probably makes it harder to pinpoint where they're bedding, but again, easier to know where they're going because there's limited food. On your side, there's all these different places they could go for food, but there's probably limited places they're going to bed, so you're able to pinpoint beds easier than you are where they're going.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's where you hear people talking all the time, and even where we give, I guess, some shit to the Midwest guys, and it's like, well, yeah, dude, of course he's going there. He's bedded right here. It's like, where else is he going to be?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people, that's why, obviously there's been a lot of chatter back and forth of like, oh, so-and-so, if I picked him up here and I put him here, he could never hunt. Maybe not. It's a different skill. But it's also, those guys who are consistently killing big woods bucks, are identifying just key attributes of those big woods. It's not like they're just walking into a big piece of timber and killing a deer. They're like, okay, here's 1,000 acres. This is the thickest spot, and this is the food. I just have to get between them.
Mm-hmm. You break it down, and dude, sign's critical. Yeah, before like trail cameras and all this stuff. That's what guys did. They just went into a piece of woods. Maybe they had spotlighted a deer during the summer. They had some idea that they're, but more often than not, I think they just went in and read sign. I mean, dude, deer are where the sign is, whether it's at night or, so if you have a suspicion about what a buck might be doing or, how he might be using an area, like the sign, especially during October, is going to confirm your suspicions.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Stealth Cam.
Dude, where would we be without our cell cams?
I would definitely be divorced at this point.
Yeah, I hear that.
I mean, the fact is I spent more time checking cameras than I actually did hunting prior to cell cameras. Now, at least, my wife can enjoy me being in the comfort of my own home, buried in my phone, checking those pictures.
Yeah, 100%. And, dude, when it comes to trail cameras and definitely cell cameras, reliability is, I think, the number one thing that we're looking for. Stealth Cam just has a long reputation of reliable cameras, and ultimately, that is the most important thing to us. They have to work.
In terms of reliability, there's not a better camera on the market than Stealth Cam, whether you're talking about the Fusion X, the Reactor, or the DS4K Transmit. And most of them are under $200.
Stealthcam.com. Check them out.
I think one thing that we have to promise each other this year, right, is that you only have 4 fingers. I can't even match on that. Is that I think the cameras are going to be really good to let us know if there's a buck in the area we want to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't let it be the determination of if we're going to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that more for myself than you.
I know.
Okay. But it's just because it's so, it almost is frustrating to a point where you get enough pictures of that deer. He's in the area, right? You know he's around, but you're just like, what are you waiting for? Like you're waiting for some sort of pattern to be put together. And I think that like when you were hunting that 8-point, had you continually gotten pictures of that deer coming out of that thick draw, then it's like, okay, cool, get in there and kill him. But even then, you didn't have enough pattern there to say, you knew he was in there, but he wasn't on the pattern to come through that exact path all the time. Eventually, you had to hunt him, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did. I didn't really wait. I didn't have any daytime pictures of him until December.
We just knew he was in there, probably.
I had some borderline stuff, and I thought I knew where he was coming from. So my approach there was observation.
Yep.
I got out there as often as I could and hung observation sets to try to be able to see into where he was coming from. I never did see him. I don't know if I don't think I blew him out of there or anything. I just maybe.
But he could have shifted across the road to where your dad killed him. That wasn't far.
Yeah, for sure. For sure could have. I mean, that's what they do. You know, where I'm at, they'll be on one side of the road one day, on another side of the road the other day. Typically, their core area consists of like 4 different wood blocks, you know, and they'll just jump around throughout the day depending on where does are at, just, you know, what happened, if a pack of dogs ran them over there or like a truck crossed the road. And
that's where it's
they
so
have
different,
options.
man. Where like on these big places that I'm hunting, if I find his bed and if I don't screw it up, he's going back to there. That is where he feels the most secure. That's his home base. He's going to then go and pivot from there, but he's always coming back to there because options are limited for good quality cover. That's just how it is.
Yeah, I would love to know how often our bucks use the same bed. I don't really think it's as often as I would like.
Yeah.
You know, that would certainly make things easier if I knew for sure where he was coming from.
Yeah, maybe in like August.
Maybe.
Because it's just bed food.
Oh, dude, and it's close, too. They bed right on
Super.
food source. Usually there's just like a high grassy patch next to the bean field. They stand up and walk right out into it.
But as you get into January, you know, well, even October, November, January at the latest, like I think they just start to bounce around. They're covering too much ground at that point because of the fragmented habitat. That's where I think it'll be interesting to see, going back to kind of this old field switchgrass debate. I like, if you have the room, I like both. I like both options because I think switchgrass makes sense in certain situations. From a large scale, per your 35 acres, it doesn't. Like a 35 acre monoculture of switchgrass for deer doesn't make sense in my point of view. There's no food in it. You know, especially in the wintertime, a deer wants to get up, he wants to browse around, he wants to lay back down. So it doesn't seem like it's cover, but it doesn't seem like that would be a place that is highly desirable if there's a place with decent security cover, but also food in it. Whereas I think if you're doing it for like a 1 acre block off of big timber or something that's just a little, it makes sense because they can get up and walk 20 yards and eat in the woods. So I think that will be an interesting piece that comes together as we see, you know, the strategies kind of push forward is, you know, how do you kind of put those in the proper chain of bedded with food, transition food like your cereal grains, destination food like a big bean field. Because the last thing you want is those deer just to stay in that 35 acre block of thicket and food, because then you can't ever kill them.
Sure. And I don't think they will. I mean, these deer cover so much ground. I mean, dude, I think, you know, I've had bucks. I mean, I showed you that picture of Lebrowski was like, was it 5 miles away?
Yeah.
You know, and he's maybe an extreme case, but like, dude, these deer will cover ground. And they know these properties so intimately. Like, you know, think about how well you might be familiar with a piece of property, you know, and you walk it like once in shed season.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe a couple times to hang stands.
Yeah, they're
You know,
doing it
these
every
deer
day.
live out there in the dark. Like
They know it like their house.
They know, and they know how to cover it and stuff, and they do, and they will. So you know, that section, it's one, you know, essentially quadrant of the farm. It essentially occupies maybe a third of it. That we're putting into this old field management stuff. I've identified, I know where, you know, we call them hogbacks. Basically, it's where these ravines.
Yep, cut.
You know, here's and to give some insight to that, like for a long time, I wanted to think it was the Midwest. I was like, okay, I'm gonna hunt the corner of this field, and they're gonna. They don't do that at all.
No,
these deer, despite what I wish they would do, they travel those bottoms. You know, if you go back and you watch, you know, your Midwest whitetails, your Drurys, you know, from 10 years ago, don't hunt the bottoms. The wind swirls. You know, you're not going to be effective down there, and they're not wrong. You know, the wind does swirl; it's challenging. But the reality is, like in where I'm at, any kind of hill country like that, that's why they're there. Especially those mature
thermals
bucks.
suck down in there.
I mean, dude, it took me 3 years of not seeing a mature buck to realize, because I was hunting on the fringes. Like, hey, they're running this ravine. Like, oh, hey, they're here and they're there. And so we would start to realize, like, okay, I don't know if it is huntable, but they're absolutely using these connecting ditches to navigate the property. And so what we derived from that was we were able to find a few. These hogbacks is basically where a ravine splits, and then a ridge runs right up through the middle of it. And not all the time, but in some cases, you know, these two other drainages just kind of peter out, and this is the primary course. And so they're forced at that point to come out of the ravine and up onto a hogback. And I've got maybe three stands like that are money. And so there's a few.
Are they usually heading towards food when they get up on that hogback?
Depends.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just kind of they'll cruise it, you know, during the rut more than anything. Everyone is a little bit different. Everyone's a little bit different, but my reason for saying that is this, you know, where we're going to put in this 30-some acres of old field stuff. I have some features like that in the core of it. And so I'm not necessarily so concerned about being able to hunt all 35 acres of this as I am being able to access a few strategic points that I know either they're going to cruise at some point during October, November, or that I can call them into. I mean, that's the thing that, you know, people don't realize, you know, because early season, you're like, I got to be in exactly the right tree. The later you get into October, November, not so important.
No.
You know, yes, you want to, you know, from a wind standpoint, from an access, you want to have the advantage, but like, I don't know what the percentage is, but like guys that are efficient at killing deer in later October and November, I got to believe a large percentage of those deer are getting called in.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, from a distance.
You know? And so if you can just read your property and hunt it accordingly, not every stand is a calling tree either.
Sure. You want to be in the places, though, that are common for those deer to actually travel pathwise.
There's probably a tree there that I can rattle, and any deer in that 35-acre thing is going to hear me and likely run this ridge right up because they know that's where
everybody
they go.
goes. Yeah, and I think that's where, you know, even some of the properties I've had success on, like I'm now trying to go back and rethink.
We need to go. I haven't walked some of your properties.
I know.
We need to go down.
I need to rethink access on a bunch of these because I think there's probably a lot of people listening to this that are like, well, yeah, but I've got food here, I've got cover here, I planted switch here, this is old field. But you're walking right into an area that's just destroying all of that work you did.
These freaking deer are smarter than you think, too.
Yep.
Like they're not logically thinking creature, but when you find those beds, you can be like, I can't even come on this property.
Yeah.
They see, like, it's not just walking either. They know where you drive in at. Like they know.
Absolutely.
They've learned to watch for like activity. They're literally built to survive.
Yep.
And so like those beds I mentioned to you that were in that ditch on the Hinton, if no matter how I access the property, that deer is going to see me.
It's going to see you.
You have to literally, and I think guys that like do weird off the wall stuff, you know, or they're like, I don't know, I'm going to come way out and around and try this. I'm going to walk in as opposed to ride my UTV. Those typically are the hunts where you're like,
it works.
Where's this deer been? Like you know, those can lead to some of your best hunts when you do really off the wall unique stuff.
Well, and I mean, I think people often
e-bikes allow for that too, you know, and like your Turo V,
to
be able to access a property
quiet.
absolutely quietly.
Yeah.
Guys think driving your truck up and you know that's not hurting anything, but
well, yeah, that, and I think that's where, you know, even if you have limited planning, which I do on several of my properties, I'm thinking about either abandoning a chunk of it or transitioning a chunk of it to screening, because I'm almost blowing it by having, even though I want more food on the property, it's hurting me more than it's helping, because that's the only access point I have.
Yeah.
Right.
Tough.
So it's food, but that's how I have to walk through. So why would I just not plan it and or put it in some sort of screening so that I can access through there and I'm not going to screw it up?
100%. So check this out. A lot of our farm is in a crop leasing program, and so it alternates corn and beans like every other year.
Yep.
Night and day difference in terms of huntability when it's in corn versus beans.
Yep.
And as much as I told you earlier, I like beans from a food source, and they absolutely do use it. Because our property is so open, beans create a real challenge for us. It's really difficult to get into some of these places. Just kind of the nature of it. I don't think we have a map of my farm here, but like a lot of there's three main quadrants of the farm, and almost all of them are, you know, woods on the outside, big ag in the middle, and the access is straight through the middle.
Yeah.
And so and like I mentioned, a lot of these ridges, you know, come down and then they come back up into these food sources, and so they can see like everything. And so when we have corn, which inevitably we do, you know, not everything is corn.
Sure.
You know, we have there's one will be in corn, one will be in beans. The one that's in corn, you know, while the corn is standing, gives us a real advantage to be able to hunt that property. Not only does it provide a hard edge on a lot of that stuff, but it's the only time of the year you can get into some of these properties without being seen. And that doesn't mean just take your UTV and rip the trail down the middle of it. It means
walk.
You can get creative.
I think one of the cool things about corn in that sense is you're still providing food.
It's corn.
It's corn.
I can't imagine a more beautiful thing.
Yeah. It has the juice.
When I tried it with butter, everything changed.
Yeah. But it, you know, you've got food and you've got screening and cover at the same standpoint. Like you literally can split rows of corn, and like deer may be in there, but they're not nearly going to blow out like if you're walking through a bean field, right? So just being able to kind of slink back and forth through there, again, it's kind of leans, like if you're going to plant one or the other, you got to consider your access strategy as much as anything else. Huge. Yeah. But I think that probably most people are not thinking that way. They're not thinking about their access in terms of what they're planning on that side. Because, especially when you talk about corns and beans, because it's just whatever the farmer puts in.
Right.
They're not planning it. So even if you have corn and beans all around you because the farmer's planted it, if you could plant 7 to 10 rows of corn, that would also help act as a screen to enter your property. You've got some food, but you also just created a great screen for you to sneak in versus if you just put it in brassicas or something else.
Yeah. Well, dude, the Midwest guys have a real advantage there. I think that crops are just more frequent, and I think they've got, generally speaking, I think better just relationships with the people that are crop leasing. Dude, it's just cost prohibitive. Like for us around here to like try to get a farmer to leave, like it's insane.
Yeah.
It's not realistic.
No. No. And I think also to do it in a way that benefits your access and landscape, it's normally like, he's like, yeah, I'll leave that corner. Well, it's like, I can't even get to that corner to hunt it.
Yeah, and it really does, when you can do it, create such a huge advantage. It's literally, that's probably where the idea of food plot architecture, you know, came from. Is, you know, if I have a thicket here, you know, and corn, you know, whatever 50-acre cornfield planted here, and if for even a few weeks during the year, I can get the farmer to allow me to come in and mow, you know, a 30-yard strip that's, you know, an acre and a half. They absolutely are going to be in there. You know what I mean? That is like the ultimate trap, you know, and you see a lot of them still, you know, a lot of the guys that you see killing deer in the Midwest, you know, the way they do that is mowing corn. Which, you know, there's I suppose is in question too, as we talk about the baiting thing, you know, people point to that and say, well, that's that is baiting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I hear the argument. I guess that's not really what we're talking
Sure.
about. But purely from a structural standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
like that's pretty hard to beat.
Yes.
You know, you've got a screening in corn that you can get into and get in a box blind, a dynamite food source, and untouched bedding.
Yes.
You know, there's not a whole lot of other scenarios that you can create that give you that scenario.
I think the other thing, you know, and especially as it relates to,
I've never hunted that scenario, by the way. I would love to. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah. No. Well, I think as it relates to kind of what you were talking about, where buck bed's here, he's got to kind of travel or come around and then get up to the food source. Or if I'm thinking about like my big wood settings where some of these deer are bedded way back in, food is up towards the front of the property because of how I want to access that thing. You know, it's so tempting to want to go, well, I'm just going to go deeper. I'm gonna get in between them. I'm going to go deeper. And I think that, number one, once you go deeper and it gets dark, when you come out, you're blowing that whole thing. Right, Nick?
Okay, I'm with you.
I'm with you. You getting it? But on a different note, you know, you're screwing everything
Really
up.
walk right into that one.
Yeah, I did. You're screwing everything else up the whole way out. So how are you actually going to access your property or hunt parts of your property? I think the answer is some of these properties are not huntable.
So hard, man. So hard. That's the hard reality I face every year of like more and more of my property seems unhuntable. You know, and while it seems like a loss at the time, you're like, oh, you know, what good is it then? You know, it's is
sanctuary.
It's still sanctuary. You know, it's just you have to.
I mean, now's the time, though, that you have to take advantage of that. You have to go back in there. You need to probably try to cut. I mean, if you're not going to hunt it, just make it as thick and gnarly as possible, right? I mean, unless you're trying to manage it for timber value, just cut and make it thick and gnarly. Don't go back and plant food plots. Why would you plant a food plot back there that's going to hold deer when you can't go out and hunt it?
Well, I've heard, you know, guys that will do that. They like to go back and plant secluded clover plots, you know, that they don't ever hunt. There's definitely a handful of guys that, you know, that's a core.
If you're setting up on the destination, maybe. But again, like, I don't care if the deer's using my property from midnight to 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Doesn't make that doesn't do me any good.
Yeah.
But if he's there from 6 a.m. to, you know, 7 p.m., that's when I want him to be on the property because that's when I'm going to have the ability to kill him.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. It's just two totally different things. You know, the big woods, there's Dad calling me now. The big woods, the public land, you know, the scout it, hunt it, you know, redesign type of hunting versus, you know, the property management, you know, strategic hunting strategy. They're very different, you know, like on, you know, the management side of things, like we're talking about. I really do think you can kill a majority of the deer on a property from a very limited number of locations.
Agree.
And it changes throughout the year, but it has probably more to do with access
and pressure.
In my case, and pressure than anything.
Yes.
You know,
case in point, just an example of that. I've got most of the food on my Ohio place is up close to my access. I've got a box blind on one of those plots, and then the majority of my property is woods and timber and thick stuff, and it sits way back. Like I can't get into it. I think it was like mid-October, October 15, 16, sometime around then. I had every buck that was 3 and older on the property at the time, which was 6 or 7 of them, in a single brassica plot during the evening hours, like during shooting hours.
Well, okay, so
it just pulled them, and they came from all different directions.
See, and this is exaggerated by, you know, the more effective the weapon. So, like, let's say you're just a gun hunter. You know, I can reach out and touch them, whatever. Let's say 100 yards, whatever, 150 yards. In that sense, if you never step foot on your property and planted a 5 or 10 acre bean field, every single year you're going to kill the biggest deer on a property.
Should.
Hands down. There's no reason that you shouldn't. If you never go on it and you don't even need good access because you don't have to walk through anything. You reach out 100 yards and touch them.
Just get there, have visibility.
Get there, get visibility on the food source.
Yes.
You know, and sit there a few days. Like,
you're going to get an
you're
opportunity.
going to kill them. Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever heard of anybody hunting Iowa in the late season and not killing their target buck?
Not
You
really.
know, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if you make it that far and you have a good food source,
and that he's there,
You
he's
know,
going to continue.
and
to
it
do that.
obviously gets harder, you know, if you are you know using a bow or using
Well, that's
whatever.
what I'm looking at is like most of the people probably listen to this are bow guys,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so,
Dude, I haven't gun hunted in. It's been 5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
probably.
when I would say most of the people listening to this that are bow guys also probably want to be aggressive, but fear of what we talked about earlier.
The
that
bow
they're-
guys, you said.
Yeah, that they're going to screw the property up.
You will.
Yeah.
You will.
Yeah. So how do you, you know, and I say that because I probably could have easily, maybe not killed it. It's up to me, but I would have had an opportunity at a couple 5-year-olds on an Ohio place in October, but I chose not to get aggressive and not to push in. And then, you know, opportunity wanes as gun season comes in. So
It's a combination, I think.
yeah, I mean, I think whether what I would like to get people to understand is just because you don't have a trail there right now doesn't mean that can't be accessed here in the near future. Like from February till June, I think trying to create some new access trails into places, or at least pinning some areas that you could, again, you might not be able to ride your whatever right to it. You're gonna have to get off and walk. But I think you can create some better access to stands in the next 3 to 4 months that come next season will change the entire way your property hunts. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt Archery.
Dude, where would we be without our Hoyt bows?
Probably shooting crossbows.
or a Matthews, yeah.
One and the same.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, we love being Hoyt guys because you stand out. When you're in this room full of other people that shoot these other types of bows, I feel like the Hoyt guys just stick out.
Dude, it's just a legit bow. I mean, especially that carbon riser, man. I mean, I know that they've got several other aluminum lines as well, but for me, I'm shooting that RX5 in the carbon model. They've since come out with the RX7, and I can't tell you how much I love being a Hoyt guy amongst a sea full of Matthews guys. So we're out there, I think, proving them wrong, shooting 80 pounds and killing stuff.
Hey, man, if you want to get serious, get Hoyt.
I think just running through stands in my mind, like the best access that I have found is typically from the side.
Okay.
In the sense
From
that,
like east-west side in?
from like north-south probably.
Okay.
And that varies, you know, because our prevailing winds are
Sure.
northwest to southwest.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yep.
so anywhere on the,
Yep.
you know, what happens.
Easterly coming into that one.
Yeah, so like, no matter what kind of where I'm coming from, I always think about bucks bedding on leeward sides.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to bed looking into the wind in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
They're either going to be on the leeward side with the wind at their back,
Mhm.
or they're going to be in a bottom where the wind swirls.
Swirls. Mm-hmm.
And so it's you can't approach from the west
Mm-hmm.
just using the general wind direction
Mhm.
because they're going to smell you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't approach from the east because they're going to see you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. That's why
Mhm.
they're bedded that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to approach from either
North-south.
the north or the south.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, dude, that's where, you know,
Or, I mean, we've looked at it a lot, I think, in the last 6 months at properties, even that we were looking to buy, and it's like, that would be a great property, but you can't access it.
Mhm.
It's all western. Like, the whole road runs on the west side. You're always going to come in the west. You can't get in from the east side.
Yeah.
Or you can't get in from
A
the
lot of my
north.
farm is that way. Yeah, it's challenging.
And I mean, those are the ones where I think people have to, you know, you got to come to the realization that your access is limited, and out of the 10 places that you have stands hung, really 2 of them are probably huntable. The other ones, you're doing more damage than good. Maybe you get lucky every once in a while, especially during the rut, but for the most part, you're screwing up.
Yeah. Well, so I guess we digressed on that conversation, but back to like killing all the deer from a few locations. I do definitely still think that's true with bow hunting, and that just comes from experience on a property. You know, you can learn it as best as you can by walking it, you know, during the off season, and running trail cameras and stuff like that. And I think ultimately, you know, you'll find that at certain times of the year, there's 1, 2, 3 stand locations where you're gonna have a crack at a majority of the deer.
So break that down for someone. If we're talking, let's throw the rut out for a second. let's talk early season, like October timeframe. Most of us don't hunt mornings in October, I would say, but still some. So let's flip on the evenings. Evening in October, you're probably wanting to hunt close to where that deer is coming to eat.
For
right?
sure. Well, and to where they're bedding. Probably closer to where they're bedding, ideally.
So you, between them.
I want to know where they're feeding, and the closer I can get to where they're bedding.
Yep.
Yeah, and so 9 times out of 10, like I said, those beds are going to be on a leeward side, adjacent to or overlooking the food source. So my approach is going to be, how do I come in from either side to where he's bedding, knowing that he's going to get up and likely walk parallel on that ridge. And that's typically going to be littered with sign. I mean, that's where you see October scrapes.
Should be.
Yeah. So like an example of that would be, it's not exactly where I killed this deer, but there's a gas line that runs north to south. There's a really thick hillside that we've done some TSI on that has a lot of bedding on it, and it comes back up to a Clover food source. That is where I killed that deer at. On the western side, on the southern side, it kind of just goes off down into a ravine. Like the ditch kind of continues on. On the north side, there's a pasture, and the road is out here. And so I'm able to park at the road and walk this gas line all the way through the pasture. I'm at the highest point, so nothing's seeing me here. I know these deer are bedding here. My wind is coming from the west. I'm able to get all the way in close. You know, that's where pastures kind of create an advantage. Is like these areas where deer aren't.
Yeah, it's desolate.
You know, that's my access. And so because I'm coming in from the side, he can't see me or smell me, and I'm able to get in there like within 50 yards of this really thick bedding area. And I don't go far. You know, I get right across the fence and right into the stand there. I've gone in, and so there's the power line right here, which obviously has, you know, is clear for travel. And there's a trail that we've cut down this hillside that goes up to this food source. And so they'll get up out of this bedding area and trickle up onto the power line, walk the distance of it, and lay sign. And there's a lot of scrapes right here. That's where I'm monitoring it until they get to the very end, which is where I'm at. And then they'll cut down that trail down to the food source. And I've got, you know, that strategy replicated, you know, it can be done in a lot of different ways, a lot of different scenarios. You know, it's not everyone is exactly the same.
I think that's where people have to look at it. Like if they reflect on this season and then start looking towards next season, like just even if you start with just, okay, where are my stands at right now on this property? And think about, how are you accessing that? Why are you hunting it? Like, is it because deer are coming from bed to food, or are they coming from food to bed and you're in between? Like, why are you hunting? Why is that stand there? And then really understand, where are the deer at when you're getting into that stand? If you can think about those three pieces of it, you're going to quickly decide if that stand should stay there, and it's a viable option, of which then, is it a northerly wind? Is it a southerly wind? Like when would you hunt that, morning, evening type thing? Or you're going to think of it and say, that stand's worthless. And between now and the next 4 months, pull it and either move it somewhere else or just hold on to it till you figure out where you need it.
I mean, I would say, as a rule of thumb, for a bow hunting stand, if it's in a place that you can't give the buck the advantage, then it's worthless.
Yep. Which makes it difficult to hunt and get to.
Right.
Super.
Well, that's why I'm saying it narrows the number of stands that you might have, you know, down to 25%. Like if you just look at a map and say, okay, like, you know, here's pinch point, here's funnel, here's this, here's that. You know, those are only as good as your ability to access and hunt them while giving, you know, those bucks, you know, they will not travel without
an advantage. There's no reason to them.
And they do make mistakes, you know. It's not 100% of the time. Like, there are places you'll catch them chasing does. They will do stuff, you know, that definitely happens. But generally speaking, you know, if you're going to kill a buck that is in his right frame of mind and is traveling and stuff, you want to be able to give him the advantage, and to be able to get out to the ends, like on either side of those leeward leeward ridges, like where that activity's happening, where they think they can see and smell everything, like that's where you're really in the chips.
I think probably one of the best ways to start on that
That's
is
where Corey killed his buck a couple years ago too.
on that.
We got out at the very end of it. That buck got up from down in this valley. Same deal. You know, we were way at the end there with the wind blowing down over the rest of the bedding area.
Yep.
He got up and he's walking so he can smell everything. You know, the wind's blowing from the food source to him, and he can see everything below him. He took it all the way to the very end until he felt like he was safe.
Yep.
And then he decided to cut up, and we're right there at the end waiting for him.
I think if people listen to this it doesn't matter what mapping tool you use. Take your mapping tool, get your contours laid on it, and just even scribble on those leeward ridges. Like just highlight them, identify them first.
Yeah.
Then stop and take a look at where those are, and then identify the food sources. Okay, so that's where your buck's probably going to be bedded. Okay, now where are the food sources that he's then going to want to travel to from there? Could be acorns, could be an actual like food plot, could be a crop field. Find those. And basically, you know, look at the possible, you'll probably have 3 or 4 tracks, I would say, out of each of those leeward ridges to those different, like he's going to this oak flat, he's coming to this food plot. That right there is going to tell you all you need to know about where your stands could be, right? The kind of twist on that is, can you access any of those X marks the spots? And I would assume that if you're doing it smart, 50% of them, the answer is no. Like there's no possible way I can get to that without just like, you know, blowing all of this out. So the other 50% become, those are your gold mines. Then you say morning, evening, north wind, south wind, and you've got it. Like that is your recipe for next season. And you start that now, right? You may have to blaze some new trails. You may have to go in there and pull a stand and move a stand. You may want to go in there now and all of a sudden you're like, damn, found this shed here, or look at all this sign along here, just to reconfirm what you're doing. But ultimately, that is your recipe to identify a handful of spots on a piece of property that you're going to hunt that you'll be successful in. And you're going to be conservatives in some places, but the amount of movement I think you start to see in terms of like, you know, a herd influencer opportunity as well, it's going to be off the charts. Where that becomes difficult is when you've got more than just you hunting it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and the reality too is they don't use, you know, so refine it down to these, like there's 3 spots.
Yep.
There's not always going to be a mature buck at one of them.
It's not every day.
Or a buck that you want to hunt.
Yeah.
It may not be even every season.
Yeah.
Like I've got whole bedding areas that for whatever reason, just there wasn't a buck on it. And so we just like, you know, nix that whole area.
And it doesn't mean that doesn't have all the recipe pieces to make it a great spot. It's just there's not a buck there this year.
It'd be cool to tie in. Do you remember that real wide 3-year-old?
Yep.
I've got a lot of daylight pictures of them and stuff. Started over at the shale pit.
Yep.
That scrape that I've got them crushing right there is exactly at that spot that I'm talking about.
Yep. Right where it would pop up in.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's so. Yeah. And then start to put those, it seems like you overanalyze it, right? But you start to put those pieces like, okay, I got a weather front coming in. It's mid-November. They've been hitting scrapes. Like now you start to look at those same X mark spots and you're like, man, there's a great scrape here that deer's been hitting. That's probably the one he's going to bump in daylight when that first October front hits.
The cool thing about a stand like that is, and you know, take this for a grain of salt, but like they're much harder to overhunt. You know, the more accessible, the less intrusive a stand is, the more you can hunt it and get away with it.
Yep.
You know, the amount of, you know, the likelihood of me getting picked off or because dude, what happens is, you know, guys think they get in and they get out clean, but what happens is they got out at 6:30 and at 8:30, 10 midnight, that buck came through. They smell where you were. They know you were there.
Yeah.
You know, they're that good, you know.
They have to be.
And so just literally being there, laying a boot track, they know. They're like, ooh, we don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, put that on top of you've got a trail camera that they might know, or you've been in there throughout the season. They don't like that. You know, you got to stay out of there as much as you can. But if you can find a stand that, like I'm saying, I'm walking through a pasture, the likelihood of me getting picked up there is very little. You know, I don't think they're in that pasture at all. Very little. There's no reason for them to be. And then when I hop the fence there, I'm very intentional about, I'll walk, it's only 15, 20 yards, but I'll go through the woods that has,
Again,
it's just
real
off the beaten
reason.
path. I don't
Yeah.
walk the deer trail in.
Mm-mm.
I kind of skirt the edge. And as long as I'm hunting that on southwest winds,
Mm-hmm.
I could probably hunt that, a fair amount of times without ever getting picked up on.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I want to be as efficient as possible. I'm going to try to hunt those fronts and stuff too. But that's a heck of a lot better than walking into the heart of, if my best stand, that's why they guys say stay out, is because they are going to pick up on you, whether they see you in the stand or they smell you as you're leaving.
Right.
The more times you're in there, and it doesn't take long for some of these deer that they won't come past there in daylight.
No. And I think people, again, when you start to talk about, you kind of dealt the hand you have, right? I mean, if your open area is in the bottom right through the middle of the plot, then that's where you put the food. That said, as hard as it might be, 90% of your hunts, you may not or shouldn't hunt the food, right? Because
that's
of
the answer. Yeah.
the way that it is, you have to establish these, let's call it less obvious placements around the food on the perimeter of the property or towards the edges of the property, mainly because you're trying to catch the deer from bed to that food. If you're on that food, you're blowing everything out. You're screwing it all.
Well, you have to change the way you hunt it. That's why you hear guys talk about rut farms versus early season farms versus late season farms. 99% of us don't have the option. A farm's a farm, and you hunt it the best you can.
Yep.
But the reality is certain farms, because of the topography, all kinds of factors, will set up better to hunt at different times of the year.
I think there's also it goes back to kind of that social aspect that you don't understand.
You don't understand.
Yeah. So certain farms and certain deer can tolerate more pressure than others. And I use an example like in Kansas, where these guys are driving cattle trucks and things all through the fields at all the time. Like the deer just are used to that. Like if you drive a truck up and drop a corn pile and leave, like they see that all the time because these guys are driving cattle fields like all through there, every day.
Some of them arguably are looking, they're attracted,
For sure. But take the flip side of that. If you're in Kentucky or Ohio and you're driving a four-wheeler up to an area and you're dropping 200 pounds of corn, they know you're doing that as well. And they know that's not normal. Like that, they may be attracted to come eat that corn, but I think that's why you start to see a lot of that nocturnal movement is they're like, yeah, dude, I'm not going to get up right now. And that corn's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And that's where guys get creative too. Like, the one thing I'm pretty confident is that deer can't count.
Sure.
And so if you try to
yes,
employ a regular tactic, get on a tractor, two of you drive in, one of you comes out, they don't know.
Well, Bill used to do that all the time.
Did he?
Right? The truck would come in to pick him up type of thing.
Yeah. Well, and that, is not ideal either. I mean, it's better than just getting down and blowing the deer out. But I mean, you drive a truck out into a field at night enough times, they don't like that.
I think that I still am very favorable to the first sit's best sit in a lot of occasions, if you time it right. And part of that's a pressure factor. Like if you slip in, the more times you go in and out, like you said, the more scent you're leaving behind. Eventually those deer are going to cross your boot track or whatever.
I hope that hits home with some people. I don't think enough people realize the impact that they're having when they walk into the woods. They just think like, nothing blew, nothing saw me. That's like 10% of it. You know, the pressure that remains because of the scent that you left by going in there that's what probably has a majority of the impact. I've had deer smell where I walked I walked in the morning, first thing, and they smelled me like at last light. Like they walked and just stopped on a dime and smelled where I walked in at. I mean, this is with rubber boots. This is with what can you do from a scent control aspect to, that makes scent lock boots. So
yeah, right. Well, and I think it also is to the point, and you and I have beat that dead horse, but the can't kill a buck sitting on the couch type of thing. I mean, the number one thing anybody should realize listening to this is you can absolutely overhunt a property and overhunt a spot. Like, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Like, just because you're putting time in the woods doesn't mean that your chances are getting better at killing a deer.
And the counter argument is you can get lucky.
Yeah.
And it can happen. It's, it's not, neither one is right 100% of the time.
Yeah, but even
it's a true statement. You can't kill them from the couch. That is true.
If you have enough spots to hunt let's just put
But
it.
I hate that. I hate that.
If you have enough spots to hunt, and I'll say this just because it kind of worked out this year. Like I didn't hunt the Ohio farm much at all this year. It was very observational, very like what's going to happen. I had more daylight buck pictures on that property than any other property I've ever owned or hunted. I don't think that's because it's just a banging property. I think it's because I wasn't there. Nobody was there. There's no human presence on that place. And so those deer naturally felt more comfortable because there just wasn't anybody there, right? The moment, if all of a sudden I started hunting that thing day after day after day, you're going to see a decrease in daylight activity because of my presence being there. I think most people become numb to it because you got one property to hunt. And so like your blinders are on to like, this is just how it always is. Like when I start hunting it, like, deer just go nocturnal. Those deer are still moving during daylight hours, right? Maybe it's only 150 yards, or maybe it's the more pressure you put on it, the more confined to those bedding areas they're going to be. So to your point, where can I set up in those evening hunts in October? Man, if you absolutely know where that buck's bedding, get tight to him. Not super aggressive,
dude,
but get tight to him.
In October, I mean, if you're not within 100 yards, like you might as well be a mile away, because they are on, that time of year, they are on a tight pattern. That's when those cameras, and observation sets and stuff are so critical.
Yep.
Because it's not like you're just going to sit in a good tree and
Yeah, it's just going to stumble.
I mean,
by.
it can happen, I suppose, but like you
not with a consistency.
Not with consistency.
And I think that people look at that and say, well, yeah, but I don't want to bump them. I don't want to be so aggressive but I mean, if you're getting pictures of this deer, you kind of know where he's bedding. And to your point, you're set up, half a mile away on the food. By the time he gets to you, it's dark. Like he's not getting up at 3:30 in the afternoon on a 65-degree October day.
And you've already gotten down and walked out, and he's now smelling where you were. And so it's a wasted effort altogether. You might as well, I mean, you have to have the information. You can't make good decisions without information. So collect the information as good as you can. Get as aggressive as you can with the information that you have. And, I mean, that's all you can do.
Which is why I think now, February, March, is an amazing time where these deer are basically doing very similar to what they do in September, October, which is stay in this bed, get up, and go to this food source if it's still there. And that's just what they're doing. And so if you can walk through these areas and you can find beds, or you find a ton of rubs, you find a bunch of scrapes, like those areas are likely where that deer, you still may have to do a little bit of monitoring, but you're going to be pretty close to being honed in come next season to know where he's at. But then take time to look around. I think because of the technology that we have in maps and cameras and cell cameras and everything else, we don't suck in the detail nearly as much as we used to do it when we walk through the woods. We're just like, okay, well, there's big rubs, there's scrapes, there's a bed. Like this deer's clearly here. I'll put a camera here next year. And you get out. I mean, take a look at the lay of the land. Like, why is he there? Which way is the wind coming on a southwest? Which way is it coming from on a northwest? How could you possibly even get there with him not seeing you? Is he going to hug this hillside, or is he going to cut straight down?
It's literally like that is hunting. It's looking for ambush points. It's understanding not just how they're moving, but it's understanding where you can take advantage of it. Where's he weak? Where's that's it.
Well, and I think that and it's no offense, but if you're just out there trying to kill 2-year-olds, none of this is very important.
Yeah, well, they're just, there's a lot more of them, and they aren't as cautious.
Yeah, they're more naive to it.
Yeah, they're not as cautious.
But if you're trying to kill a mature buck, it's critical. And so I think that's where
they become increasingly cautious and less plentiful.
I think that's where people start to get a little confused. Is, and no offense to these guys, but they watch Bill, or they watch Jared Mills, or they watch Don Higgins, and they say, well, these guys have 160 acres and they're just hunting the outskirts and the corners and like just waiting impatiently. I think that you have to take that with a grain of salt and understand a little bit what they're hunting and what their strategy is and how many days of field they're spending versus the average guy. Right? The average guy isn't hunting 95 days a year. He's got 10, 15, whatever it is. But I do think that's also an advantage because you're not tempted to put too much pressure on a piece of property. You've got a very calculated amount of days to do your hunting. if you do it right, that first time in could be the only time you need to sit. So
I mean, there's no right or, I mean, it's not possible to go in the first time and kill the deer every time.
No.
And as much as we say that we might want to do that, I don't know if that's the reality. Like the season is a journey,
Sure.
and you want to enjoy it and be in the woods as much as it's enjoyable, but you don't want to overpressure a property to the point where your chances are dwindling.
Yeah.
So, you just have to
I had a streak.
Take it as she comes, man.
I had a streak of 3 years, first sit, kill a mature buck.
I don't think I've ever done that. I don't think I've ever.
It started the year before that
I killed
deer.
on a second sit.
It was a different deer, that deer, and then this deer. All were first sits, studying kind of where I knew that deer was. All late October, like that 23rd, 24th, 25th time frame, and usually hunting near or in between bedding and a scrape was strategy there.
Yeah.
And all called too.
Yeah.
As well.
I think it's way more critical in October than it is in November. I think in November, I've killed a lot of deer after sitting in the spot for 3, 4, or 5 days.
I will say that the more that we hunt, and it seems crazy, the less I like November over late October. I like late October a lot.
Yeah. Well, and dude, I think anybody who has hunted late season over with a food source will tell you there is no better time.
Well, and that's where like a guy like me where most of my food sources are completely gone, I haven't seen a buck on some of these places in weeks.
It's challenging because, there's way less cover, to provide access to a stand. So it's like your options are limited. You might have 10 stands, let's say, to hunt throughout a season. By the end of the when the late season rolls around, I mean, you might not have any, and if you've put the work into it, you might have 1 or 2, but that's where all the deer are.
Yeah. You're either in them or you're not.
And it has its own challenges too, with lots of eyeballs and in cold weather. And so,
Yeah. I mean, you're pretty much only hunting evenings again. It's back like early seasons, just evening hunts.
Yeah.
I think that when you start to, if anything, when you're getting ready to go out here, the reason we talk about this is the next few weeks, most of us are going to be putting a lot of boots on the ground. Right, and cover ground, and we want to look for sheds. Ultimately, I think it's time to go back and be a little bit more of a steward of the land, what you're dealing with, what you've got available to you. For a lot of us who don't have big food sources, like some of my properties are desolate at this point of deer. So really, I'm going into some of these areas to look at the sign that was left in October and November, because I haven't had a deer on it since December. But I think it's also critical for people to think about what is the limited resource on that property. For most of us, it's probably food, especially if you're in big woods. Not saying that everybody has the resources, but maybe you have the friends that could. I keep going back to almost why did I wait so long to clear an acre out on my property, and how much change that had on that property with food.
Yeah, a lot of guys, it seems like, just pile stands into, like, they might have 40 acres and they've got like 10 stands on it.
It's not possible.
That's like, what? How?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, I think a lot of people look at it purely from a wind standpoint. Well, if I put this here on a southwest wind, I've got it, or put this here on a north wind, I've got. How do you get to it? Where again?
Way more importantly, how are the deer going to use the property with that wind? That is the main thing. Like, dude, people have taken this wind thing and said, okay, I need to hunt with my wind is good.
Sure.
Yeah, that's true, but like, it's not, I don't think, nearly as important as understanding how the wind is going to dictate how deer move, and then your ambush points need to just change accordingly.
Yes. I think that's,
dude, there is something
that's
special to like that spot where you can't get smelled, but that that one spot that I'm talking about, I've never killed a deer out of it, but I will. It's just perfect. Like, they will not ever smell me there with a southwest wind, and that is when the wind is exactly in their favor. They'll cruise that leeward ridge. They'll pop out right at the stand. They can see everything in this big pasture, and then they keep on going.
I think that if most people broke down their property, take a couple days, just look at it, and then go out and see that spot, because you're not going to screw anything up right now. On a like I'll look at my Ohio place. It's 130 acres. I probably have 4 spots that I could hunt. And one of those is probably, if I don't screen it better, it's out. That's one of my box blind spots. But other than that, I probably have 4 spots to hunt on 130 acres. And most of those are in the front 50. The back 80 is almost sanctuary. You know, it just, you can't. If I go in there, I mean, it would probably be during a rut hunt, and I probably would have to go on the outer edge of my perimeter and then come in on some sort of westerly wind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that we haven't mentioned, because it doesn't really pertain to us in the Northwest, but creeks and ditches, baby.
Creeks and ditches are huge. Yeah, I have a couple creeks, but no ditches to cover me.
Yeah, in the Midwest, there's a lot of cut bank streams and stuff. I mean, that can be
huge access.
You know, a lot of them run right through the heart of some of these properties, you know, and if you can get down below the line of sight, it kind of holds your scent down there too. That can be huge.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's probably the hardest to fathom is those bottoms, because I'm sure most of us are always like, buck's bed up on the high, you know what I mean? But to the point of how these deer are traveling and where those thermals are and how that, I mean, there's too much sense to be made of those deer cruising these bottoms, just because of the advantages that it brings to the deer. Huge disadvantages to a hunter, but I still think from an analysis standpoint, if you analyze some of these bottoms, and again, it's because most of us are bow hunters that it's hard. I mean, you could get in a good position to kill a deer working these bottoms.
Oh, for sure.
I think from a bow standpoint, it's super tough. From a gun standpoint, yeah, I can be on the bank of this ridge watching this bottom at 200 yards and shoot a buck probably often. From a bow standpoint, how do I get that deer within 30 yards? I have no idea.
A lot of times I think it's a conjoining ditches, you know, so where more than one's coming together, usually that'll provide access, and like typically your wind's going to blow down one of them.
So I've got a really good one. You'll see it on this new property. I've got a smaller like branch comes down to the main ditch here, and I went down in that bottom, and it's an awesome spot to come in. And I think I can come from the east down that ravine on a westerly into there. But again, to get down to that point, you know, I'm almost walking that entire branch down. So I'm banking that those deer are going to be coming back up that to bed, and I'll have to catch them before they get there.
I have to see it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where, you know, no property, and I guess it all comes back to, you know, anything you hear, including this entire podcast, you hear it on YouTube or wherever, take it with a grain of salt. Like, understand that, like, you have to take what's being said from, you know, us, Sturgis, you know, Winky, Higgins, whoever, right? And figure out how that's going to mold to the property that you're hunting. Because no property is the same. No deer movement's going to be the same. There are basic concepts like those leeward ridges, and how those bucks are. That's a fact. But how they do it on each property, because of the way that the ridges lie differently, is not consistent, right? It goes back to like even our talk on censorship. None of this is objective. It's all subjective to the terrain, to the access, to the pressure, to the deer.
Well, and it's just from our experience. I mean, you're a whitetail biologist. So, you know, you have that.
Yeah, but I don't.
You have that
no
knowledge
idea
on that stuff. But dude, there's guys out there, probably a lot of them, but surely that we've talked to, your Sturgises, your you know, any consultants are in their very nature of their job, you know, spending a lot more times on a lot of different properties than we are. You know, our experience is just from properties that we've got, you know, been able to access and stuff like that. So, you know, fairly limited in that regard. So that's why we have those guys on. You know, we're trying to learn, but I think there's those best practices and principles that I think are true on a majority of properties, that if you can, you know, overlay enough of that information and apply it to, you know, the property that you're seeing in front of you or on your map there, you know, you can be pretty effective with it.
I think the other big one is, if you're looking at buying property, even if it seems like the one, take a breath and evaluate that one pretty hard, because I think, you know, even some of the properties we've been looking at in Illinois, the access would have destroyed them probably.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's been other ones where it's like, that one might have slipped through our fingers, and it probably was like it had good access. We could have made something of it, but you know, keep in mind when you purchase a property, you know, you're taking control of something that like you're gonna have to live with, and Sturgis will be the one to tell you that. You know, there's definitely properties that he's consulted on that he's like, man, you know, it ain't worth a damn, because you can't hunt it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may have deer on it and you'll see them on camera, but good luck trying to get into there and actually, you know, you'll get lucky every once in a while, but consistency, you know, it's probably not going to work out. So I think those things are what become, you know, increasingly more difficult to deal with, and understand and really be okay with. You know, tell somebody that the property that they just bought that's 100 acres, that you have 2 spots that you can hunt and the rest of the property basically no go. That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just can and should. I mean, it's just like, you know.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, that's the harsh reality is like the more you're on a property, you know, the worse off it's going to be. You know,
and yet most of us are buying property to recreate on it, to be on it a lot.
Yeah, and so it's a balance. You know, if your sole purpose in buying a piece of land is to kill big deer, then don't ever go on it. Yeah, for real.
True.
Just you know,
yeah,
go on there and you know,
do the work you have to,
do
set
the work,
the stands,
learn the property, and stay off. Monitor as best you can, and then go in as little as you can. But, you know, you buy farms for more than that in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
so you find
life.
ways to separate it, and, you know, you can still be, you know, you can still kill deer.
And if you're one of those people who comment and say, well, you know, I got 30 acres and every year I kill a 5-year-old out of this tree, you're a lucky son of a bitch.
It does happen. Yeah, those spots exist. They're far and few between, but.
Yep, they do exist, and you've got, you know, a diamond that you need to hold on to, because most people will buy ground and never have that experience in their life. So, anyways, be a good time to start getting out, do some habitat work, start making some plans, maybe find some sheds, although we rarely do.
Grind mode, dude. I mean, the reality is we're working a lot more than we're, you know, the New Year's like kind of a reset. You know, we a lot of our real estate business kicks back off early in the year. People are like, oh yeah, land. You know?
Yeah, I'd like to buy some. I have some to sell.
We're out of the holiday. Slumber.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been running around like, you know, getting a lot of good work done and trying to.
Well, I'm prepped too. Like, you know, I just bought some switchgrass and stuff from him. Like, before you know it, it's going to be March and April and May, and planting season is upon us. And so, you know, we have these discussions now because it's good to break out a map and just start to jot down some ideas. And, you know, not everything has to be done in a single season, but start to think about, that's why I said limiting factors. Like if you're like, man, and these deer just aren't, put food on it, you know, or if you're like, man, I have tons of food, but I got no cover. How are you going to create cover?
Yeah, just chip away at it, man.
Just start chipping away and
plant some trees, burn a field, you know, frost seed some clover.
It'll make a big difference.
Cut some trees down.
Yeah. And that's the best part. I mean, I think for a lot of us, this year round, this off season becomes so critical to our mentalities of, you know, we're giving back to the land, we're developing something, we're going to see the fruits of this labor, you know, come next season.
Yeah. Dude, I do love seeing like, you know, I'm not that old. I'm 29. I'll be 30 in March, coming up here pretty soon.
Big 3-0.
Yeah.
Welcome to the threes.
Nice.
Yeah. My hairline is proof. So, you know, it's cool to, I think just in the past 2 or 3 years, like I've started to like be able to reflect on like a year over year, like, you know, cause you know, how are you, Nick?
25.
25, you know, you went to college, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He's still in it.
You know, so when
he graduates
you know,
high school.
So you go from high school to college, and then like there's just like a lot of transitioning happening, like the whole first part of your life, and then like and even kids and stuff beyond that. But so like the past 2 to 3 years, like you know, I got married 6 years ago, and so like not a whole lot of change has happened in terms of like.
Yeah,
I guess a lot has. You know, like we bought a business. We've got a ton has actually changed, but. I've been able to, like, for the first time, be able to look back, like, season over season and, like, kind of compare it to where I was, like mentally, like in terms of progress with certain projects we're working on from year to year. And like the new year is always a good time for like a reset. It's like typically for me, a low point in terms of like, like here's my year in review real quick. You know, throughout the summer, I'm getting in the best shape I can. You know what I mean, I'm doing everything I can to fight the demons and get physically in shape for a September hunt. And working our balls off. And then hunting season starts, and we kind of, you know, we digress. You know, that's just what it is. I know it's going to happen.
We're like a sonic chili dog.
Yeah, we're full on. You know, we're just in the zone, and then at the end of that, you know, it's just kind of like, you know, heap the last mashed potatoes on top with, you know, the holidays. You know, and we're drinking beer and you know whatever comes with the holiday, you know, time, and then the new year comes, and we, you know, flip it over to like, this is the reset time. So this is time, I think, to start it all over again, start working hard, you know, start getting into and so I like to think that this year I'm ahead of where I was last year.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, how would you summarize this year's, like before you lead into the new season, how would you summarize, like, do you feel good about what happened last year? Are there things you're like, damn it, I need to fix that?
Yes, I would say I feel good about it.
Are there any like disappointments or regrets, or like I'll start like on one of mine. I wish I would have just hunted my Ohio farm more in October. I put it off. I'm like, man, these bucks are just always here. And then next thing you know, they're not there. They're gone. Not saying that it would have been a guarantee by any means, but I definitely had a lot of opportunities to you know, get after a couple really good bucks, and I just kind of put it off. And that was mainly because it was first year on the farm. I didn't know what was going to show up, what was going to disappear, you know, and so I'm not, like, I don't regret how I hunted it. I don't regret not filling a tag in Ohio, but I do, in retrospect, think I probably should have went and hunted some of those places a little bit harder when the time was right.
No, I don't have any regrets. I think that, I mean, dude, every season is like, you take it as you come, you know. Ultimately, we're a lot of like what we're working so hard for and building up to is the season. And I think, you know, frankly, I've gotten better and better at embracing it when it gets here. And I like to think I'm a pioneer for everybody around me to be like, stop what you're doing.
Yeah, it's hunting season.
Smell this. Like, you know, just breathe it in. Like, look at what's around. Like, dude, late September, October, that like this cold front, they only come around. And like, it's such a magical time of year. Like, what a miss or a loss that it is for people that like just work through it. They're like, oh, I've just been too busy. I'm like, why? Like, what? You know, and I have sympathy for people that, you know.
Shit happens.
You have responsibilities. You have kids. You know, certain seasons are different than others, but like, you really have to be intentional about like making the most, taking it all in every season, and then rebounding at the end. You know, and so I learned a lot this season, obviously, from, you know, I made a bad shot on a buck in November that worked out. Fortunately, we recovered him. Missed a deer in Kansas in December. That was a bummer. You know, I regret missing that. You know, I like to think I learned from that experience, but yeah, no, overall, better and better. I think improvements. You know, physically, dude, which is such a huge aspect. I mean, we were talking before, like Nick, I'm 204. Stepped on the scale last night. I'm gonna say that's the most I've ever weighed.
Straight bulk style.
Yeah, which is good. I'm trying to. Yeah, weight is good in my sense. So the goal as of right now is 210. Could end up being 215.
Really?
By midsummer.
Wow. Damn. Straight pack meal.
I'm gonna pack it on. Get a little creatine cycle going. And then, from there, you know, it's back into this new season. So I'm excited about, we haven't really talked at all about, it seems like usually by now we've thought like, hey, September we'll do a mule deer hunt.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. So obviously we want to do something. So I'm excited for what.
Well, we're coming up to
like.
Seasons of tags, you know, where we've got to put applications in for Kansas and Dakotas if we're going to do that. I think that it's one of those times that, you know, you can kind of get caught sleeping a little bit here in February, especially because there's literally, like, it's gray, it's nasty, nobody wants to do anything. But then before you know it, it's March, April. And if you haven't made plans and strategies to what you're going to do, things are going to slip by you pretty quickly here. And then before you know it, it's summertime, and then we're back into it thing. And that's this time is always good, whether it's a picture. You just, everybody that's a serious big buck hunter finds something between February 1st and March 31st that just gives you a glimmer of hope into next season. It could be, hey, I tripped on this and found this giant rub, or maybe I found a shed from a buck I didn't even know existed, or I found a buck that shed that I did know existed, but it's way bigger than I thought. Everybody finds something in the next 60 days that helps pull them through a little bit longer. So I think if you kind of, take that for the next 60 days and again, really try to figure out some sort of limiting factor on the property that you're going to hunt next year. And if you can affect it and change it, try, because it's going to make a giant difference come next year. For me, a lot of my places, it's still food, or it's changing access, or whatever it might be. For you, it's cover. And I think when you start to get down that path, like those little successes just make next season a little bit closer in terms of reach. To just know that, hey, it's one step towards something better next year.
Yeah. Well, and also the acknowledgement of like, it's not deer season. Like, yeah, as much as I want to, be participating in that stuff, and I will, when time allows and stuff.
Sure.
This is time to work, and so like as much as I look forward to the season, I acknowledge that like, hey, I poured my heart and soul into it when it was here.
Yes.
And now I'm going to work hard, and it's just parts of it are going to suck. And
yeah, but it's good too, because the hard work now is what gives the flexibility then to do what we want.
And what makes you appreciate it, because if I can put my head down now through August, and then pick up at the end and be like, it's friggin' deer
there
season,
it is,
baby.
there it is. Yeah. That's it.
That's what it's all about. Cyclical.
Like a circle.
It's all a circle. Not like a square, but like a circle.
Cool. Well, if anybody is heading to the Great American Outdoor Show and you're listening to this, I guess I'm there today because this is February 7th.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm there today. Tomorrow the 8th.
I'll be there the
9th.
The weekend.
Yeah, so I think the 10th is when we play musical chairs and switch out. So, but for the next 5 or 6 days, if you're out at the Great American Outdoor Show in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, stop by the Whitetail Properties booth, and that's where one of us will be. Say hi. Don't punch us in the face if you're a crossbow guy. And yeah.
Try it.
Try it. See what happens. I'm at 204. See what happens.
Stop by and grab us. We got nothing to do. We're just there to chat with people. So
yep, it'll be awesome. So yeah, if you're making your rounds, make sure you grab Jared or I, say hi, and we will talk to you all next week.
See ya.
Take me